Okay, so today I'm going to talk about how division of labor at home affects fertility intentions using data from Taiwan. So this is already a published work, and it's something that I think is relevant for all these pronatalist policies that are being implemented in East Asia. So first of all, let's take a look at the phenomenon in East Asia or all over the globe. So we know that period total fertility rates have fallen to lowest low levels in many countries in the past decades, and in particularly since 1990s, the fertility rates in East Asia has also been dropping very rapidly. And we noticed that some countries have witnessed a reversal of total fertility rates um, with the weakening of the postponement, putting off having children. Postponement means putting off having children, the timing effect. But however, other countries we have seen very limited rebounds, such as in Korea, in Japan, and in Taiwan, Hong Kong as well. So most of these countries with limited rebound of fertility rates are located in Southern Europe or in East Asia. So oftentimes demographers have argued that gender equality is at the core of such different fertility outcomes. And what kind of gender equality are they talking about? They're basically saying about the division at home is critical. And so countries where men and women share more equally at home regarding domestic chores, they often see more sustainable fertility levels in their own population. So the question is that is there a stalled gender revolution in Taiwan? So what we're seeing is there's this persistently unequal division of domestic work between spouses, and this is often linked to low fertility rates for a persistent long period of time. And this is particularly severe in countries with traditional gender norms. So this has been documented in past research. And in fact, in Taiwan, women still shoulder the bulk of domestic chores and shoulder the main responsibility for taking care of their children in Taiwan. So here is a graph that I used that is plotting using data from the panel study of family dynamics database. So we're seeing the lines are reflecting different birth cohorts. So the earliest cohort born before 1949, there basically the woman in that cohort is shouldering nearly 80% of the household chores, and this pattern didn't change much up until the latest youngest cohort who were born after 1984. This brown line here, it's only been down to 67% or so. There are some decline, but the scope is not very impressive. And when we look across East Asia, we see that South Korea in particular have this highest share of domestic chores among women. The situation is slightly better in Japan and in Taiwan, but the decline is also not very big. The regions or countries with better or more egalitarian division of labor is observed in Hong Kong and in China. And of course, these are influenced by the socialist system as well as the colonial past of Hong Kong. So basically there's some important motivations to do this study. One of the key question is that does division of labor affect married women's fertility intentions in Taiwan? And so what we're seeing now in current research are some limitations that have been observed in the literature. There are two of them. One is the region-wise limitation, the other one is theory-wise. when we're talking about region-wise, we're talking about there's very limited research on division of labor and how it affects fertility intentions or the actual childbearing behaviors in East Asia. And ironically, East Asia is also a region with one of the lowest period total fertility rates in the world, but this line of research is still relatively limited. And theory-wise, what we're seeing in all these existing Western research on how division of labor affects fertility intentions or behaviors is that most of the time, the educational level of the mothers have been ignored. It seems like researchers think that how well educated a woman is doesn't really affect her fertility intentions and along with the fact that whether she receives a lot or very little help from her husband. But there's very good reason to believe that women's or mothers' education attainment matters and it will have important policy implications. So let's take a brief look at the current literature. So what we're seeing is that between gender equality, division of labor, and fertility intentions, it has been shown that couples with more gender egalitarian attitudes and equal division of domestic work have better relationship quality. And they also tend to have stronger fertility intentions than other couples without consistent egalitarian attitudes and behaviors. And also, and what we need to notice is that time spent on housework and childcare tended to increase with the coming of a newborn. And this is particularly the case for women and not so much for the man or the husband in that family who is already having a child. And then the positive effect of spousal chore sharing on fertility appears to be task specific. So when we're talking about task specific, here we're referring to the fact that your spouse can share child rearing task, or he can share this household or housekeeping chores. So it seems that spousal sharing of childcare matters more than sharing housework. And a husband's help with childcare, they have a very distinct positive effect to really raise the likelihood of a second birth in Germany, Italy, Finland, Norway, and Spain. That's what we have seen in the existing research. But like I said earlier, there's no much research in East Asia regarding this association between spouse chore sharing versus women's fertility intentions. And then we briefly take a look at why education matters. So this can be thought about from two perspectives, from the socialization perspective and from the structuralist perspective. So from the formal perspective, education is related. It matters for fertility intention because women who are better educated, they tend to envision more equality at home. Their idea of ideal relationship involves more equal sharing of power, of resources, and of chores at home. And from a structuralist perspective, higher opportunity cost can be expected for tertiary educated women versus the kind of opportunity cost for much less educated women. So these are two important reasons for why we think that education should be taken as an important moderator when we are looking at the relationship between spousal chore sharing versus women's fertility intention. And perceptions of gender equity and the work-family balance tend to be more of a challenge for well-educated women than others. and this is particularly the case in traditional societies with rigid institutional arrangements. And this is exactly the kind of context that all the participants of this symposium is experiencing. This is pretty much the case in East Asia, and also very similarly in Southern Europe, where the imaginations or the kind of ideal wifehood or motherhood is still relatively traditional, and the institution has been slow to adapt to women's rising or changing roles in the society. Okay, so next we're gonna take a quick look at how Taiwan has changed over the past decades. So since the 1970s, there's very rapid industrialization and economic development in Taiwan. And both of these sort of speed up the demand for skilled laborers, and thus it's really prompt the first wave of educational expansion in Taiwan. And later on in the 1990s, there's second wave. But regardless, both waves have really led to the fact that the proportion of men and women aged 15 to 49 with tertiary education has really rose rapidly from around 3 to 6% in 1975 to about 45% in 2015. And this kind of improved human capital also benefited women's employment prospects by raising their labor force participation rates. For those age 20 to 25 to 29, what we're seeing is their labor force participation rate rose from 41% in 1978 to more than 90% in 2015. So this kind of social change is co-occurring with this fact that fertility rates have plummeted over the past decade, from 4 children in 1970 to only 1 child in 2020. And last year it was only 0.98. And this is this kind of extremely low period total fertility rates have been observed across all East Asian societies. And simultaneously, it's also this really fast declining marriage rate that is taking place at the same time. So even with these events going on, what we're seeing is that women, they progress in paid employment, they are much better educated. At the same time, the younger generations of men are also contributing more than the older generation to domestic work. But in 2016, we're still seeing that women contributed almost 80% to total housework hours in Taiwan. Okay, so on the research question for this empirical study is that we want to ask how do wives' trait and couple characteristics affect domestic division of labor. So we want to see what are the factors that affect the division of labor at home. This is first step. And the second question, we want to explore how does domestic division of labor in terms of dividing housework task and childcare task. They're looked at together and separately in our models, empirical models later. And we want to know how they affect women's fertility intentions in Taiwan. And with this kind of, we explore this association. And then in the meantime, we want to know, does this link vary by women's educational attainment? And whether it matters what kind of domestic work a husband share. Okay, so these are our key questions. And I'm going to go through the research design of this study. So the data comes from the 2016 Women's Marriage, Fertility, and Employment Survey, which was collected by the government, and it's a nationally representative sample of all 15 plus married and unmarried women, and the sample were nearly 15,000. And the WMFE survey is a long-running repeated cross-sectional survey since the 1980s. But only until 2016 have we seen that husband's domestic work hours included in the questionnaire for the very first time. And this is why we only use this wave of data. The analytical sample is restricted to women between the age of 15 to 49 at parity 1. So to enter our study, you have to have at least one child. And then the child, and no matter how many you have, one of them has to be under 18 years of age. And why do we limit to women with children? Because transition from 0 to 1 child, the kind of increase in childcare task is not is of different nature from when you already have one child and versus you are considering whether to have a second child or not. So when you transition from the status of no childcare task in the household, it's very difficult to evaluate whether your husband whether he shares a childcare task or not affect your intentions to have child, because basically there's no childcare task when you are parity 0. Okay, so the dependent variable is how many children do you intend to have in the future. So when the woman indicates she wants to have at least one child in the future, she will receive a dummy code as 1, otherwise 0. Independent variables, we have wife's daily domestic work hours. We put hours on housework and hours on childcare together, and also we separate them in different models. And then we also have this indicator for percentage husband's domestic work hours separately for housework and childcare as well. And then the control variables, we have parity, whether a woman is parity 0, 1, 2, 3. No, parity 1, 2, 3. There's no parity 0. Whether she already had a son or not, because we know with the idea of son preference, it also affect women's fertility intention. So we have to control for this. And then wife's income share, wife's work hour shares, wife's age, wife's education. And then there's this couple pairing characteristic of whether a spousal education gap is homogamous, hypergamous, or hypogamous. And also there's also age gap with the similar 3 categories. And finally, we use logistic regression and propensity score matching method to investigate our research questions. So first of all, this is the descriptive statistic. So we see that about 13% of these parity 1 women, parity 1 plus women, they intend to have another child. This is not very high. And then husband on average share about 1/5 of housework or childcare. And the most of the analytical sample, they are parity 2 or 3 plus. And about 74% of them had a son. And their wife's income share is about 28%, and their share in working hours of the entire couple working hours about 35%. So wife's age distribution is like this. Most of the over half of them were between the age of 30 to 39, and another quarter between 40 to 44. And in terms of spousal age differences, over 60% of them were in the hypergamous union, where the husband's age is older than wife. In terms of educational levels, they're about almost half of the women had a tertiary education, and also slightly over half of the couples, they are in a homogamous union, meaning their education level is the same: high school versus high school, college versus college, graduate school versus graduate school, etc. So the first step, we want to look at what affects a husband's housework input. So we see that in model 1, higher parity is negatively related to husband's share in domestic work. So is wife's older age. However, women's higher education, higher income share, and higher working hours are positively related to husband's domestic share, domestic work share. When we break down the kind of task into housework or childcare, we see that the parity effect is mainly driven by the patterns we observed for housework sharing. And the age effect is mainly about childcare. So what we're seeing is that older women who were basically marrying older cohorts of men who tend to be more traditional, these men were sharing much fewer domestic work. Next is our second set of questions. So we want to ask how is a wife's fertility intention affected by all these different variables we include, and of them, the key variables of interest is husband's share. So it's their share in housework and childcare combined, and the second one is their share in housework and share in childcare, and there's this interaction term of husband's share in interacting with tertiary educated wife. So we're seeing here is the husband's share in housework matters, but this is particularly the case for tertiary educated wife. And this first three models refers to all kinds of domestic work combined. So then we want to know this kind of positive effects, where does it come from? So we then, models 4, 5, 6, we only looked at husband's share in housework. So we see that there are basically no effects of how a husband share domestic housework and whether it will affect their spouse's fertility intention. But when we only looked at husband's share in childcare, we see that this positive effect and significant interaction effect comes up again. So basically what we're seeing in models 1 and 3 is mainly driven by husband's share in childcare. And so this is similar to some of the patterns found in a number of European countries I mentioned earlier. And then here we see that never having a son also matters. Women sharing working hours also matters a bit. And then tertiary educated women have more significant effect. Then because the fact that the likelihood of marrying a man who are willing to share housework and having a stronger fertility intention, they might be affected by the same set of factors. So the next step what we're trying to do is to do a pseudo randomized matching. So we match women on traits such as age, education, parity, etc. The key covariates included in the models. And this is using this propensity score matching method. And we want to see how the so-called treatment, there's a cutoff of husband shares more than 20% of child care time. And we use this as the treatment because I believe 50% of the sample have a husband who share 20% of childcare time, or maybe another percentage. There's a rationale for choosing this cutoff point. So what we're seeing here is that when we're looking at all the couples, there's this average treatment effect that is significant at parity 1. So these are women who already have one child. And this a very similar average treatment effect is also found for tertiary educated parity 1 wives. But we don't see a similar ATT average treatment effect for non-tertiary educated wives in this propensity score matching analysis. So when we see that it's parity one that matters. So if you have if a woman already have 2 children, and her husband is making lots of effort trying to share childcare task, what we're seeing here is that it wouldn't increase her fertility intention to have a third child. But this kind of husband sharing matters for having the second child for among parity one women, and this is particularly the case for tertiary educated mothers. And so on the other side of the story is that we can also say that if less educated women had a husband who is willing to share housework, will the fertility intentions be stronger? No. So this counterfactual analysis tells us the answer is no. Okay, so this will be my final slide. So I briefly summarize the key findings of this study. So we see that the positive impact of husband's input into childcare on his wife's fertility intention was mostly restricted to parity one couples, but not those of higher parities. And also, this is very similar to the patterns reported in Finland and Italy. The positive effect of childcare sharing from fathers' fertility was mainly found among tertiary educated mothers who were more likely to form unions with helpful partners. And we are also seeing that even 20% of childcare sharing from husband could raise fertility intentions for wife. This shows us really it's a feeling of fairness rather than absolute equal division of labor that matters for mothers with young children. And the fertility intentions of less educated mothers, they were very likely motivated by factors other than division of labor at home, since they might be more accustomed to traditional gender roles and have less bargaining power when facing an unequal division of labor. What the crucial thing that they're lacking is more likely financial well-being. So it's really a matter of money, whether they can afford a second, third child among these less educated mothers. So these findings really tells us that pronatalist policies aiming to boost fertility will likely need to offer different combinations of parental leave and financial aid packages to women with different education for the optimal policy effectiveness, because the different sectors of the mother population really seems like having different needs when they are considering having more children. So even if fathers can have paid parental leave, it might only increase the fertility intentions of highly educated mothers, but not those with less education. So aside from the theoretical implication of this study for really taking into account mothers' education, I think the findings also bear some critical policy implications. And this is my presentation for today. Thank you for your attention.
Clarifying questions for the two presenters. For Professor Alice Cheng, your question was basically based on very rigorous analysis of survey data. And I was just wondering, so your main finding was that, husbands in the share of housework, that effect on fertility intention is most kind of significant and prominent among the women with tertiary education. Do you know any other kind of similar findings or studies based on other societies? Because that would be a very, very important kind of thing. And also, on the other hand, do you think that kind of significant effect among tertiary educated women, do you think that effect would be even more stronger, like higher or stronger even among women with tertiary education with employment, compared to, women with tertiary education without employment. So yeah, that is my question.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Im, for your question. Like I mentioned earlier, this similar patterns were reported in both Finland and Italy. And of course, Finland is probably a bit less relevant for East Asia, but the fact that Italy found similar things that would sort of make me expect that if there were similar kind of data available in Japan and let's say Korea, maybe we'll find the same things. Because normally family demographers in particular think that Southern European countries are quite similar to East Asian countries in terms of their collectivist culture and the fact that the marriage of two persons is not really about two people. It's not really just these two individuals. It's a marriage of two families. So the parental values and expectations really have some non-neglectable impact on their adult children's decisions. So yes, similar findings were found. Well, in terms of the fact that husbands' tax sharing is particularly important in childcare, and that's what the childcare sharing of increases fertility intentions of women's this kind of finding is found in Finland and Italy. But in terms of these educational variations in how the association between husband's health and fertility intention, I don't think I've seen similar findings in other countries. Like I said, this is one of the limitations in existing research. Basically, most researchers somehow just ignore this education effect and really not thinking about its moderating influence on the association. And the second question, whether this finding will vary for tertiary educated mothers with employment versus those without employment. To be honest, I didn't test this in my study, and I would expect that the effect would be probably stronger for those who are employed because their time pressure and then the conflict between work and family is stronger. So I would expect that their husband's help matters more than those stay at home, better, well-educated mothers. That's my answer.